Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode. And today, Sean and I are going solo, and we have what we feel is an exciting topic for you. It's called hallucinations, so maybe a little mushroomy conversation today. But basically, what we're talking about here is generative AI and a whole bunch of hallucinations that kind of can come along for the ride. So I'm going to turn over this show to Sean, and I'll drive the screen for him. So let's go ahead and get this thing started.
Excellent. So one of the questions I get asked all the time is, Sean, what are we doing about hallucinations? And hallucinations is a funny term. I think it's hilarious. The terminology that people throw towards AI, like AI is a human being who is on the wrong meds and is losing its mind. They're also called bugs in the software world. So why are large language models wrong all the time? All the time. People are very, very surprised when they see quality issues with large language models. And one of the ones that I love to pull up now, it's being fixed a lot because it's such an embarrassment, is asking how many R's are in the spelling of strawberry, right? Gemini just last month said there are two. If you look at Llama 2, it says there are 5 occurrences. And you could see when I asked strawberry, it didn't even spell it right. So, one of the things that people really just have a hard time grasping with large language models is they're not a human being. They're code. And more importantly, they are mathematical statistics. Why large language models can't spell very well is because they don't know how to spell. They are a database, and that database is encrypted into these numbers called vectors. And that's how the technology works. David, you made a great point once explaining that it's kind of like a 3-dimensional cube, right? And this is how they do the magic that they do, but they have limitations. And one of those is it just doesn't know how to spell. So the second thing that I love to pull up and people talk about is just looking up historical facts. Who was the mother of Alfonso II, third king of Portugal? And it comes back and it says, hey, it was Beatrice. Right? You look up on Wikipedia, Beatrice had no children. So she couldn't be the mother. Sometimes, I know some of this is kind of crazy. Sean, why are you doing Jerry Springer episodes with large language models? But, the end of the day is people have very large inflated expectations from an accuracy perspective with especially public large language models.
Yeah.
For most statistics that I've seen, it's about 84% correct. Anytime that you ask it a question, it's going to be a solid B student, right? And if you are trying to do, pub questions for Friday night, this is really good and exceptional, right? If you are doing surgery on a cancer patient, this is incredibly bad. You don't want 84% success rate on surgeries. So, when I talk about hallucinations, I try to explain that they're just bugs, right? They're extremely common. About 15% of the time, you ask it a question, you will get a wrong answer. And whether it be something very simple like spelling or something very simple like doing a Wikipedia search. Two things that I know I have personal problems all the time, right? So if you could skip to the next slide, David.
Yeah.
I'd like to just talk about some of the causes and types of hallucinations. Data contradictions is the biggest challenge that I'm seeing from our clients. They're like, Sean, we took all of our knowledge base, loaded it into a RAG model, and we're getting no better than a flip of the coin. So the more data you add, the more difficult quality is going to be achieved, right? So people are saying, hey, Sean, the easiest use case out there is knowledge base. Well, by my experience, that's just not the case. Not the case at all. So RAG is taking your data and adding it into the large language model.
Yep.
There's two problems with that. One is you are trying to add your data to the entire corpus of the internet.
Yep.
Have you ever tried shouting at the internet and see if they listen?
Yeah.
Right.
Sean, I got a quick question for you.
Please.
So one of the things that I have seen as you're talking, has kind of triggered some thoughts that I had. And so the solution to some of these problems, and I think this is pure anecdotal from my end, is if you use a small language model as opposed to a large language model, you reduce the risk that your proprietary knowledge will have a significantly higher weight to that AI backend as opposed to using a large language model or even a bloated, I'll call it, I just made that word up. A bloated
trillions
language
and trillions.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they're getting that way now too.
Again, when they start doing quadrillion size, David, I think you should coin that term, bloated language models, BLMs.
Yep, BLMs. Yep, you heard it here, guys. First on today's show. We'll start the new trend. We'll put a hashtag on LinkedIn.
Exactly. So that's problem number one, which is you have a data disadvantage, right? The second is when you have so much data in a pile, you could have one piece of data contradicting another piece of data.
Yep.
So basically think of it as you're sitting down with your kids, you tell them something, your wife later tells them something, and it matches about 90%. Well, that 10%, I don't know about your kids, but my kids will just pick what's best for them, right, on that last 10%. That doesn't mean it's accurate, right? So contradicting data can be solved by going through and making sure you have the cleanest possible data going in. And you nailed it on the first one. You may want to think about layering in an embedding only model as OpenAI offers, or maybe you want to layer in just a BERT, and use a BERT and build on top of that.
Sean, explain to people what BERT is, what the acronym stands for, just in case we got some folks here that are new.
So before there was ChatGPT and GPT in general, Google came up with a way to do a general inference model. So if you recall, at one point with Google, when you added search, you had to type in the whole word. It didn't autocomplete, right? BERT is how they accomplish that autocomplete. They give it some basic knowledge to do that autocomplete. And so when you type things, it's guessing what the search you may want. And you can use something that rudimentary and build on top of, and just leverage the natural language understanding to be able to achieve your use case. So data contradictions is number one. Number two, which is getting better and better, but it's still a problem, is problems with your prompts. If you ask, again, I always think about dealing with large language models like I deal with my kids, right? You have to be extremely precise in what you say. You know, go take a shower, use water, use soap,
Use toothpaste.
rinse, turn off the water, get dry, get dressed. So prompting is very similar to that. If you start adding contradictory things, like if you tell your kid, hey, you know, go take a shower, go clean up your room, go do this, and they decide, hey, you know, I'm going to do the first one and the last one, but not the middle one because I got confused. Very simple on this. And I want to show examples of this here really at the end of our discussion here, that there are prompting contexts that you can use to have a better understanding of what the large language model you're using is doing. So the next is factual contradictions. So this is where the Alfonso II example comes from. So
Not to be confused with Fonzie.
Yeah, exactly, not this guy. This is where it has somebody on Reddit, right, goes through and says, this is an absolute fact. And, you know, a good portion of the community believes in that. And then another part of the community says, I completely disagree. So you have two reputable sources of data having conflicting information. Now, this is typical in highly competitive fields of discussion. Technology, there is the Microsoft versus Google teams. There are in politics, in religions, you know, anywhere that there is a high degree of debate, you're going to have factual contradictions.
Yep.
So your use case is really going to have to drive what technology you want to do. And it may be that this technology will not work for you because there is too much internet debate about your subjects. The last is flat out errors. And you know, this strawberry has 3 R's. You know, the model that you use are all tuned differently. They are all configured differently. They all have different guardrails on them. And these guardrails are constantly being improving to be able to get around this. And we'll show more on the strawberry question, but I can't emphasize enough, you know, if you build something with large language models, you should absolutely make sure you could switch providers if you need to.
Yep. Just a quick call out too, Sean. I think if anybody has any questions or problem with it, this is one of the things that Sean and I have a pretty good line of sight on. So reach out to us via LinkedIn if you'd like to learn more, take a workshop, do a one-on-one, whatever the case may be. But there is definitely a lot of devil in the details for that one, and a way, as by way of a service and or suggestion, to set up benchmarking across multiple LLMs and benchmark to see which use case potentially is right for you. It could be long and arduous and a little bit confusing to get set up when you first get going. So anyway, sorry, quick plug. All right, let me switch to the next slide here.
So then it comes down to, as I was saying, the more you know, the more you can be able to handle these issues. Every technology has limitations. I can tell you, I lose my mind when I'm trying to make a reservation, food reservation on my phone, and I get a notification pop up, from one of my apps that's trying to sell me something I don't want right now, right? And
Pop
then,
up.
every technology is going to have limitations. And the more that you know how to work around them, the more successful you will be with it. So first and foremost is, and I know this should go without saying, if you're a technologist or you depend upon technology, if you're a digital transformation expert, you should know that technology only works if it is tested thoroughly. And it has to be tested to a standard, right? And being able to set that standard, in this case, it's called ground truth. So you go through and say, these are the type of questions that we're going to want asked. These are what the expected answers are, not written by AI, but a human, and saying, this is our expectation. This is our levels. Business requires to operate at a certain degree of expectations. When you hire people, you say, this is my expectation for you. When it comes to large language models, think of them as an employee. Yeah, you need to set the expectations and you need to monitor the results.
Yep. Well said.
Number two, and I'll jump into it right after this. There's a concept of reflection prompting. Now, back in the day, when Moses was running networks and I was an administrator, I would require logs, right? Verbose. Remember, you would take an application and you put it in verbose mode, and it would give you a lot more information to allow you to troubleshoot. Well, this is one of the issues with prompting that people have, is you have to tweak and try. Well, some very smart individuals on the internet have basically been able to come up with context that you can add to your prompt that will make it provide you a lot more detail and verbose and what it's thinking, so that you can understand, did your prompt confuse you? Did your prompt confuse it? Is the output bugged? Is the data wrong? Being able to navigate these several different areas is really going to be the huge challenge. The third I like to talk about is governance. I talked a little bit about in the front. You have to set the levels. When you're using this technology, you have to set what is acceptable and what is not. Like I said, my first use case, if all you're doing is creating some pub questions for mildly drunk individuals, that is completely okay, right? And even having a wrong question or wrong answer may generate engagement. What's the YouTube standard? The best way to get engagement is to post a incorrect fact. But in the case of surgery, you can't be 82, 84% successful. You need to be 5 nines. So understanding what the expectation is and making sure that the technology meets or exceeds it before being in production is what governance is all about.
Yep.
Last but certainly not least is there are hundreds, thousands, maybe 10,000 of language models at this point that are at your fingertips, right? Ignorance is your enemy here, right? There's always new ones coming out. You should be up with all the major ones: Microsoft, Google, Amazon. There are many very popular open source ones like Mistral and Llama coming from Meta. But there are so many others. I should recommend Hugging Face. Is a really good way to keep up to date with what I call the script kiddies. The people who are out there who are constantly innovating, constantly trying new things. What happens when you remove all the guardrails? What happens when you limit the languages it can speak? There are people out there who are doing some groundbreaking work. Based upon your use case, there may be the optimal model, and you could save hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars potentially in costs using something that is tailor-made to your use case. So those are the basics. But now I want to jump in and start showing something. David, did you have any questions on this?
Well, yeah, it looks like we got somebody had asked a question in a chat. Let's see here. It said, I just asked GPT and it says 2 as well. I feel smart now. And then a follow-up statement or question. I'm trying to read this in real time. Here it says, I asked to recheck, and here's what it said. You're right to question that. There is only 1 R in straw, but 2 R's in berry. So in total, strawberry has 3 R's. Apologies for the earlier confusion.
Yeah, well, at least it isn't, open heart surgery. My apologies. I took out your spleen instead of, your kidney.
Should have made that left turn at your aorta.
Exactly. We all need to set realistic expectations of what technology can give us. As I always say, it's not a magic wand, right? So here's a good example of my Gemini, right? And it's getting it right. How many R's are in strawberry? And it says there are 3 R's in the word strawberry. So you can actually see they started layering in basically RAG of where it's coming from. So really cool, the Gemini that you have access to is public. Now, I did one on the Gemini Pro, 1.5 Pro, and it's like, hey, let's count them. There's no R, we have 1, no, we have another, and there's no R in RY. There's no R in RY.
Just out of curiosity, do you think it was case sensitivity that tripped it up?
We certainly, it's a good question. We can always ask.
And just for those watching this literally in real time, this is how it is in the real world. If you're developing or writing a prompt, it's literally this, I wonder why, trial and error.
Yep. And this is the challenge that you have. And I know it's ludicrous spelling strawberry, but if you're going to be working with this technology, you're going to be doing countless prompts. And up until this last week, the previous week, I never understood how, what the cheat code around for prompt troubleshooting is. But, here is GPT 4.0 mini, and it gets it right. And here is Llama 3, and it gets it right.
Yeah, some things that do creative, like some really crazy fringe prompt that I've done in the past. Like if I had this problem and I was trying to solve it and I couldn't circumvent, and I needed to solve it with maybe a one-shot or multi-shot example or something to be baked into the prompt, I would literally tell it to break apart the word into each of the characters and iterate through each one and increment a counter to solve and ignore case altogether. And if you build that into this kind of long-winded prompt, the hope or the suggestion is crazy approaches on prompt engineering can help you solve some of these craziness. or some of this craziness, hallucinations that you see. But it goes back to Sean's earlier point. You have to test. You have to test. Think of for those that are programmers that are on the call or watching this, whether it's replay or live. One of the things to keep in mind is making sure that when you're doing this is literally akin to doing manual test cases. You might be able to do some automation around it, but you really want to have that human in the middle, at least initially, until you are 100% sure that you're going to get the output that you expected. Sorry about hijacking you there. Go ahead.
No. Again, so this is what's called the reflection prompt that people are talking about right now. I've seen it in so many different locations. I don't know the author, but whoever the author is, please reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to do a hat tip to you because I was just so impressed with this. Again, we are certainly living in AI innovation world right now in real time, that every week there are new tidbits of information coming out to be able to help you layer this technology better. And I believe that everybody out there, just like everybody does Google searches, people are going to have to learn how to prompt. And if you recall, David, on the tool that you were demoing way back when, you had the ability to put a context in to your profile. This could certainly be that context, right? Where you are looking for prompt testing. So you can read it very simply. It says, hey, create a thinking section on any prompt that I give you, and I want you to analyze it using chain of thought so that you can understand exactly how you would process that, and then provide me your reasoning, right? And then give me an output. And this makes things much more easier. So if I were to put that in there, and it's like, here it is. The question asks how many R's in the word strawberry. I'll analyze the spelling of the word and count the occurrences. This is what it's doing, right? It's going to write it out, identify, and confirm the count to ensure accuracy. I've correctly identified this task, and it says, hey, there's 3. So again, this is explaining. I gave it a very simple question, and this is telling you how the model is doing its work. So I know spelling is a very simple one, but think of any prompt that you can imagine, and it will tell you exactly what it's doing to try to figure this out. So that if maybe you're prompting incorrectly, which is one of the common hallucination problems, it will tell you. If the data is conflicting, right, it will tell you, right? It helps you understand the cause of hallucination and how you can address this by solving whatever the root cause is for that hallucination.
Hey, so, Sean, I am curious. You mind doing a live experiment?
Certainly.
All right. So if you were to paste, say, that prompt in again, but let's augment that reflection prompt, add something to the bottom of it along the lines of, and be sure to include the vectors referenced. I'm curious if it would spit the vectors out, because this, for those of you data scientists out there, this will be very helpful in creating or fine-tuning potentially future models. So as we talked about going through all of this, one of the things that we did mention earlier was about the testing and trying to figure out which large language model or bloated language model, BLM, is going to be the right one, or if you need to use even the light or small language model. That is something that could potentially help you here if you could get those vectors out and then be able to modify and augment that.
Yeah, it's certainly not.
Oh well,
not doing it.
It was worth a shot. And it could also be the mileage will vary from language model to language model. GPT may have, or which one are you using right now?
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
This is
You're just using the
Llama 3.
assistant, the built-in. So that one is actually a Claude Sonnet 3.5, I think.
No, I'm in
You're
Llama
in
3.
but you're using. Oh, you're in Llama.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So this one is GPT. Let's see.
You can they recently created a feature on Poe where you can do an and then call out the model. So if you do like something at the very top of your prompt and say web search or llama assistant whatever, it'll actually allow you to stay in the same context. You're switching over to Mini.
Yeah, I switched over to GPT-4.
Yeah.
And it completely ignored the vector request.
and that's probably by design, especially OpenAI. Like they've tightened a lot of stuff down in their system level prompt to keep people like us from jailbreaking and investigating.
Exactly. And who knows if in the next version of these models that they're going to break this and you won't even be able to use it.
Yeah. So if anybody that watches after the stream, if you got any comments or you've got any helpful tips to keep the conversation going on LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this, just add and pile in all your comments on there below. And it's a good conversation to have, because hallucinations, even though it's kind of a light subject that we're covering, there's so many use cases, it's kind of impossible to get to. But if you've got an interesting use case or story, definitely share it, even if it's long-winded. It's pretty interesting to see what everybody else is encountering, plus maybe what you've done to solve it too, and we can all kind of learn together on it.
Well, I mean, and here is Mixtral. You can ask the same question, and it says for Mixtral, it counted twice as well.
Yeah, that word is a nemesis of large language models for sure.
Let's see if Claude 3 and Claude 3 says 2. So again, people are always telling me, Sean, this model's better. This model's this model's that. It is so dependent upon, I think we've done this with 8 different models today, and like 5 got it right and 3 didn't. And certainly the older ones are more susceptible, but this one, Claude 3, is fairly modern and new. So when it comes down to doing anything with generative AI, especially the language models, it's absolutely critical to define what you want to use it for, test what you're using it for, and then govern it so that if it were to change, you can fall back to someone else. And until we get to some kind of maturity in this space where, certain tasks are ubiquitous, no matter what models, you're going to have to continue that. And that's really the point of hallucinations that I want to wrap up for today. Is hallucinations are a really good example of a bunch of technical people inventing a word to make it sound more difficult than it is. It's just bugs. Some of those bugs are in the model. Some of the bugs are in the data. Some of the bugs is how you're asking the question. And how you deal with them is just like any other technology. There's nothing to be afraid of here.
Yeah.
It is yet another example of how models are not yet completely comparable. And depending upon your use case, will depend upon which model would be best for you. And that's why I tell people the things I do, right? So I appreciate everybody's time today, kind of walking through and going deep diving into hallucinations here. And want to hand it back to you, David.
Well, thanks, Sean. I really appreciate the demo. That was kind of fun and interesting at the same time, and the presentation was excellent. I do want to make a call out, though, to next Wednesday. As most of you know by now, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time, we stream a live session. Sometimes we have guests, sometimes it's just Sean and I. But next week, I want to introduce or pre-introduce you to Dan Hansvik. Did I pronounce that right, Sean?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. And next week, we'll be talking a little bit about a lot about cybersecurity, because, regardless whether it's large language model or computing and everything that's going on in today, cybersecurity is one of those, I don't know, it's like a conversation that most people don't want to have, but they need to have it. And of course, all of this goes full loop, because as the large language model comes in, Sean and I just had a conversation in our green room or pre-show here, talking about clients and customers having problems with bots flooding up the network. Some or most could be very legitimate, but you got to consider now AI is now another player in the actor of the stage of what's going on in cybersecurity. So be sure to tune in and visit us online at transformationleaderspodcast.com. That's it for this week's show. Thank you, everybody.